So I just want to start off by saying everyone needs to go to the STEAM building, which is the STEM building. However, we've added an A for art, because that's part of innovation, right? We can't have innovation. We can have science, technology, engineering, math, etc. But we need the artists and the designers to package things for the world. And Destiny's work is on view. She has created a 22 by 15 foot collage banner, and it's just amazing. And there's also a whole series of her collages on view as well along the wall that is facing the quad. Destiny Palmer is trained as a painter, but her work explores intersections of painting, history, and color, allowing it to blur the lines between painting, sculpture, and installation. Palmer has participated in exhibitions at Antenna Gallery, the Colored Girls Museum, Automat Collective, Eli, I should know that from New Haven, the Eli Center for the Arts, and the Vandermoot Gallery. Palmer has led workshops at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and most recently here at Landmark College earlier this afternoon. Palmer investigates what it means to be an artist, educator, and advocate for the arts. She has worked with various communities to create public art projects ranging from traditional murals to community-engaged and led murals to digitally created murals. Palmer has worked with MIT, Lifewater, Saxby's, and Mural Arts Philadelphia. Some of her murals can be found at the Gallivan Community Center in Mattapan, Kendall Square, Cambridge, and the Navy Yard in Philadelphia. Palmer received her Master of Fine Arts in Painting from the Tyler School of Art at Temple University in Philly, right? And Bachelor in Fine Art and Painting from Massachusetts College of Art and Design. I was trying to think when I first met Destiny. It was 18 years ago in 2004. Is that 18? I'm not. Yes. 18 years ago. It was a long time ago, and we both worked at the same art gallery, which is a nonprofit art gallery in New Haven, Connecticut, called Art Space, which is still in existence. It's a great community, grassroots gallery with a real mandate and a mission to reach out to the community and to also help give artists a venue for their work, maybe underrepresented artists and artists who are not widely shown. Anyway, it was a great, I remember I was coordinating community programs. You were you in high school at the time? Superstar, even back then, Destiny was a superstar high school intern with the gallery, and you did all manner of things. But also, I remember we did this education program like during school holidays, and Destiny helped out with that. I knew back then that she would go on to great things, and she was always an amazing presence, as you are now, and you've gone on to do such amazing things. This is just a little bit what I read off of her accolades, and you've also worked with like the mayor of Boston, and who is now the what is he? He's like the Secretary of Labor or something. So she's done some amazing works for the arts and advocate for community projects and public artwork. So we're really fortunate and happy to have you here. Thank you so much, Destiny.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yes. Does that work? Great. So my name is Destiny Palmer. I am going to just share with you that there's one image in this slide presentation that might be a little triggering. So we won't stay there, but I do think it's helpful for me to reference it in relationship to my work. I was thinking a lot about how I might share my work in relationship, and I think part of it is I'm often doing a lot of reflecting, like how did I get here, what am I doing, how am I moving forward, and since you all are in, I can remember being an undergrad and really thinking about what I was going to do, and I was really struggling with how to make all of the things make sense and build connections between what I was interested in and what I was doing. And one of the things that I have learned over the years is that I needed to be patient, which I still am not. I'm not very patient at all. But that really was what I needed to do. And so I want to share the beginning parts of my work right after undergrad, and then kind of this journey to where my work is now. And so if you've been to the STEAM building, you would have seen this lovely banner, which is a collage where my work is currently sitting. And for me, this is really the most recent stopping point for my work, and I'm really excited by it. But I didn't get here automatically, and so I'll end the slideshow with this image again. So when I was in undergrad, I really loved abstraction. I've always loved abstraction. I've always enjoyed painting and thinking about color and design and layering and really formal kind of matters of painting. And I really wanted to paint large, obnoxiously large. I wanted to cover really large buildings, and I didn't know how I was going to do that. And I really wanted paintings that I learned the hard way, wouldn't fit on the train because I didn't have a car. Or even in or out of my apartment because it was so tight. So I learned the hard way, but one of the things that came out of that was making this large piece that's made up by 2 feet by 2 feet panels. And really just thinking oh, this is kind of cool. I can actually make a really long painting and just keep it growing and going and going. And actually the second version of this, as I started to shift over, was actually here at Landmark. I don't remember what year that was, but
2014.
Yes. And so that was, kind of the scope of where I was, and I still wanted to paint really large. This painting is about 8 feet tall by 10 feet wide. And that still really wasn't enough for me, but I didn't really know what to do. And so I just kind of kept myself open for a huge amount of possibilities. And really what would happen is I'd say I want to paint really large, and I'd throw it out into the world, and someone in the world is hearing me and would say, oh great, you want to paint large, here's this opportunity. And then I'd go, oh crap, I actually don't know how to paint that large, right? But I started really growing and learning on the fly and just, taking all of the opportunities that I had. But really and I loved it. I loved all of these things. This is at the Aloft Hotel in the Seaport, Boston. And what I started to realize was that my work was maybe going in a different direction than I personally wanted to venture with. And I was really struggling with it because I was doing the thing that I wanted to do, which was paint really large and take up space. And explore the ways that my work can kind of be explored. So I'm just going to go back to this painting really quickly. This painting is actually the basis for me exploring some of the commission work that I currently do. So I take a photo of a small portion of this painting, and I replicated it so that it could be the backdrop for this textile. And then I replicated it again to then create a different banner or mural. So this, this original painting has had an immense amount of life, which I got really excited about. And that, has taken its own kind of path. And then I started painting outdoors in the traditional murals, which I think I'm still kind of navigating because I'm still pretty new to that realm. But it is really cool to be out in public making paintings for or with communities that look specifically like me. And so this was my first. I was working with Life Water, They have a really great community program, but I still was struggling with it, even though people were still like, oh, you like painting big, here's a really good space, it's huge, it's huge. I still was just struggling with my personal work. And it kind of like got me to grad school. So when I got to grad school, I had just decided I'm not going to paint with hard edges anymore. I'm going to start painting organically. And I had a really horrible relationship with drawing, actually. It just didn't make sense to me. I really struggled with it. And I just didn't do it. I was just anti-drawing for a really long time. And then I also decided, well, maybe this is a time for me to do some really like true introspection and start researching my family history. And what I came across was these two images are of my ancestors who were purchased as a wedding gift for a family. And what I came across was, one, there's a person in my family who was a great historian, and so she had a lot of documentation about this work. And the whole time that I was kind of gaining all of this information, I just decided that I would make some drawings. And so you can see how I'm pairing one element of drawing and research at the same time. And at the time, like, drawing then becomes really lighthearted, it becomes really accessible, it becomes really easy. And then what I realized is that it's all how I'm processing this information is pretty heavy. And then I retrained myself around historical kind of elements so that I just had a clear understanding about my family's relationship and my relationship to American history. And my family is predominantly from South Carolina, and so they're very much a part of the slave trade. And through some of my research, I start exploring maps. I find a lot of maps. I find a lot of historical documents, and I find them to be really fascinating. But the point is, I'm an abstract painter. I have all of this research. I'm not going to paint people. Like, I've decided all these rules. I'm not going to paint people. But what am I going to do with it? So now I have this other kind of looming issue or challenge of how to pair these things together. And for me, it really was a time to just kind of keep digging. And I when I say that I was like frustrated, I was like thoroughly frustrated that I couldn't like make a painting really quickly to resolve, what I was challenged by. This document I had come across, and in my research, I started looking at a lot of artists who were using imagery or using this type of research as the content of their work. And what I wanted to do with it and what I ended up doing with it are two different things. So I had seen things like textiles be made from the actual image, but I really wanted to dig deeper. I don't know if it's here, so I'll go back. So in the top right corner of this document is actually a notation of how much space should be allotted per slave on each slave ship. And this is thinking William H. Turner's slave ship, if any of you are familiar with art history in that way. So William H. Turner makes a painting about all of these slaves being thrown overboard. It's a really beautiful painting with a horrific kind of story. But after that, what ends up happening is a lot of people who are managing the slave ships are deciding that if they lose their cargo, also known as people, they lose their cargo, they want to be able to write it off through the insurance company. And the way that that is dictated is the measurements of the boats. And so they decide that for a woman, for example, it would be 60 inches by 12 inches by 3 inches. So when you're thinking about how many people are actually on a boat, they're not thinking about it in a humane way, they're thinking about it in a capitalist way. And so I started making work very specific to that size. So if you're ever looking at my website or my work and you see really slender paintings, it is this exact size that's there.
So
But
it
yeah.
was to maximize, right?
It was to maximize and also to recoup your costs,
Yeah.
right? And so it's kind of just bizarre, but and this is actual law. So this is of the Brooks slave ship, and it should carry about like 455 people. But again, along with all of this content and information, what I was coming across were just really interesting documentations. The Library of Congress has a really great resource for images that you can access and utilize. And I didn't really know what I was going to do with it, but at the time it was really helpful for me. I've consistently done this over the years as an artist, is get something and then go talk to my grandmother about it. And she's typically going like, what are you doing? Why? Does it make sense? But one of the things that she was able to help me with is to really just make sense of some of the images that I was coming across. And this one specifically led me to making a piece about cotton picking. So these are cotton picking sacks. You would drape it over your shoulder and throw the cotton as you're going down the field rows. But I really enjoy that type of multi-generational kind of communication that was happening with me and my grandmother, and essentially with me, my grandmother, and my mom, and my ancestors, and the relationship it had to painting. So now I'm trying to mediate that I'm a painter. My ancestors have all picked cotton, and the medium that I paint on is cotton duck. And I still think I struggle with that, but cotton duck really just is almost in in so many industries. It's everywhere. But it just felt really bizarre, and I really needed to like kind of come to terms with that. But I also needed to come to terms with that as a painter, and I was really struggling with that history. And as I was kind of retraining myself or reteaching myself some of the history, the thing that I came across were all of these fainting chairs. So I was putting together this like actual history, my love for color, that color history, textiles, my familial history, kind of all putting it together. And I was making a lot of weird work for me, because as you saw at the beginning, I was making these hard edge, large abstract paintings that were really colorful. And here I was making really colorful work, but with a really deep and kind of heavy history. And what I started to hang on to was the labor. I think I'm really obsessed with the idea of labor and whose labor is doing what and when labor is required. One, as a painter, and two, as like a descendant of people whose, labor was required to gain so many things. And so I started making a series of I call them paintings. Paintings using actual work gloves. So both of these pieces are deconstructed work gloves. So I cut them apart and then sew them back together, and then they're kind of like thrown on a painting frame. And they've lived in different kind of like aspects. They've lived just draped on a wall. They've, kind of like explored different types of things, different sizes and scales and whatnot. But the first one was me kind of, the one on this one, because left and right. Yes, so it's mostly grit, yeah, but it does wait. No, but that one was my first one. It's kind of like going down this rabbit hole of what am I doing? I don't know that this makes sense. And I bring it home to my grandmother, and she's like, yeah, what are you doing? What's going on here? Kind of backs out of the room. I'll leave you there. Good luck. And then I go back to Boston, and I come back home to visit her, and she goes, so hey, I have these gloves, do you want them? They were my old work gloves. And I don't know what happened, what she was thinking in her head, but she now knew that I needed her work gloves. And so my grandmother worked for Yale University for 33 years as a janitor. And so I lived through kind of processing labor in that way. Labor and privilege in a very interesting way as a kid. And that really just falls into my work. And so it starts making sense, but not fully, right? Like at all, it still doesn't make sense. I mean, this hung on my studio wall for like multiple months, just like, it just looks like a weird ghost. What are you doing? And so I really started taking off with it, but I was really terrified about making such a departure from painting because I just really still love painting. And I didn't really know how to mediate it. And it wasn't that I wasn't making drawings or paintings at the time, but I just couldn't see how they balanced one another. But I really did start to explore it while I was kind of exploring this fabric motif and writing and drawing a lot more in my practice. So in this piece, I don't know if you can see it very well, but I'm going to try to point. But in this grayed area, actually says they picked cotton so that I could paint on it. And that kind of lives with my work right now. Really thinking about, like, how am I stitching this together? One of the beautiful things about using fabric is there's a lot of it. Stitching it together, and then how it starts to mimic the form of a body if you're wearing clothing was really interesting to me. And those of you who are art history buffs knows how much draping is talked about in multiple parts of art history. So I was really excited to start making these connections to art history in this way. And then I finally get it. I finally realized that the painting and drawings that I'm making actually just need to pair. They just need to be in close proximity to the other work. But the other thing I had realized was that all of my work started like having a very similar color palette. So if you can remember from those first few slides, it kind of had like this large array of colors, and now I've gotten really simplistic with them. So what comes out of this are a few series of mine, all under labored bodies. Is the yellow series, there's a fuchsia series, and there's a black and blue series, and I can talk about those if you're ever interested. But I really started to like, oh, I'm almost there. I think I got it. I'm getting there. And so the work and the research kind of like leads me into some really heavy content. I start a series that's centered around like 1920s, or even really earlier, but 1920s to 1940s, specifically in the South, all of these lynching and these lynching photographs. So now I've taken my work through slavery, I've taken it through the connections to moving south, these huge like flights of people or huge migrations to the north after emancipation, and I'm sitting with these just historical documents. So this is where in the next few slides, you're going to see the triggering image. But what's really interesting to me is to really start building the connections about one painting and to the painting history, cotton, me as a painter, color, and all of this, all of these stories. There's beautiful stories that are told throughout this time period. And I got really caught up in listening to people who witnessed lynchings and how they were documenting them. So I was really stuck, probably in a really dark place at that time. But I made a whole bunch of paintings that way. And then they started to get really weird. And I started to really just like, well, maybe they don't need to be paintings anymore. Maybe they just need to start being something different. Maybe I cut up a painting, which is really terrifying for us painters, is to start cutting up a thing that you've now invested all of this time into. So I'm like petrified by the possibility that I'm going to cut something up. But I do, and it actually is really gratifying. But again, I want you to just keep in mind that I am currently painting probably 8-foot by 10-foot paintings. So to cut them up and to put them back together really wasn't a task that I was prepared for. But I was really excited by it because I started having a really interesting relationship, one with the wall, the white gallery space, negative space, all of those things, but also the content. So I think I wanted to slow down. I started moving through the work, and I felt like it was moving faster than I wanted it to. And mostly it's like I get excited, one, to make a painting, one, to sew something, and to see what comes out of making. So this is the image. So I keep going back and forth between cutting things up and arranging it on my studio wall, and then going back to the photos. And it's not until I'm like actually sitting with it that I'm recognizing how many things are mimicking itself in the actual work. And even then, it still doesn't fully feel right. Like it just doesn't. And to some extent, it still doesn't to this day. But I know I'm going somewhere. And so hands start to develop out of this body of work. And in all honesty, the hands were in my work when I was in high school, but I was like so anti-figuration that I was not going to allow it. So even now, I think I'm like, okay, well, we're like, we can put the hand in, but we're not gonna like do whole body stuff. We're not like painting people, right? Like, no, we're not. No, we're gonna be hardcore abstract. But the hands are really interesting to me because as I'm reading all of these stories throughout history, all of the slave trade, all of my family's history, I'm just thinking about all of the people that wanted something, right? Like they wanted something and they didn't know what they wanted, but they needed to have it. And there's something about greed that like kind of shows up in these storylines that I'm intrigued by and I'm trying to like consistently wrap my head around. And this also starts to happen around pandemic time. At the very beginning of the pandemic, we start reading about people collecting toilet paper like it's going out of business, or hand sanitizer, right? And it's not that like the person is saying, I'm going to use multiple crates of toilet paper, so I need it. It's like, I need to have it because I can have it and I know where to get it. And that's scary to me. There's something really scary about that. But if you think about historically how people are wanting to gain something or have something, we just see this like current theme throughout history just leading us this way. So hands start to make a huge amount of sense to me. And it also starts to make sense to me that they're not grasping anything. They're not holding on to anything. They're extremely flat when they show up. And they really just start to take off in their kind of own realm. New materials start to kind of invade. I'm still using fabrics, but in a really concrete way. And collage makes way more sense to me now as a painter because, there's so many things that the fabric in its own history can hold for itself that I couldn't necessarily paint. And so I'm excited by all of these histories kind of clashing, but talking or referencing the same thing. But again, it's really actually hard to work at that scale. So during the pandemic, I start working smaller, which is also something I was like anti my entire arts career. Small paintings, when people are like, oh, I made a big painting at like 18 by 24, I was like, huh, that's not small. But here I am making these like very small collages now. And so I got myself a Cricut, one of those hand cutter. Oh, I love it. It's like the best thing ever.
Saves your hands.
It's amazing. Which is like this die cutting machine. So I'd make all these drawings that I wanted. I'd send it through the machine. It would cut the paper for me. And then I'd start rearranging it. Then I started painting paper. The colors that more so the colors that I wanted. I had this mesh going on, and I was like drawing and painting all in itself. So it's like kind of where I've landed this far. And these actually aren't real. So when I say that, I mean that they are just digital. They only exist digitally. I have a method of working on the scanner. So I'm layering all these things. Put my scanner bed down, and then I scan, and the whole piece goes away. And I don't know how I feel. I probably am going to like regret it in about 15 years. But currently, I like this quick method of trying to resolve the challenges of the histories that I'm trying to put all together. And I think symbols are coming more into play in the work, and they've kind of like showed up in weird paintings here and there, but it's really exciting to kind of explore hands and these textures and textiles in this way. I get to be really selective about my color palette, and that's kind of where I am. Which brings me to this. This piece has the beginnings of where I was exploring the kind of cut paper, and this is the first time that I explored two other elements in this work. which were a design drawing of a cotton plant that you'll see in the center. And then behind that is denim. I know that we all have a pair of denim jeans, but it is also cotton. And so there's something really interesting about a history of a material that we all kind of universally have a relationship to, even globally. But I'm really excited about this work and being able to make it this scale, because I'm back to making large things. But really, this is where my work is. And it's simply to say that the way that you are progressing through making, or even trying to make sense of what you're doing, can be really complicated, and to be patient. I'm going to leave it there so that we can have questions. So thank you. No questions? Great.
So you're in lights?
Yeah, I'm open now.
Lights?
Lights. Are they these? Yes.
What inspired you in the first place to make the massive paintings just continuously grow larger and larger?
When I started, I wanted to be annoying and obnoxious. But the more that I grew into making large works and really settling into that, meant that those paintings are an extension of me, and they get to take up space in a way that I sometimes don't get to as a Black woman. And then it makes me want to be really obnoxious even more. But really, it's about this reclamation of space that artists have through their work. You can make a massive painting, right? And that is going to be ultimately bigger than you ever are. And it has this ability to just, I don't know, be there forever, I guess. Just have this long afterlife than you. And I really believe in that. And when I'm doing the murals in community spaces, so I went to Omaha, and don't ask me how I got there. But I did a mural in Omaha, and I worked with a mostly Black community in Omaha, and it was so powerful to make this massive mural in their community. And they were like, this is our mural. People in their community showed up to paint it, and they just owned it. And I felt at that moment, oh, this is why I'm painting this big, because I and them are making or reclaiming space where they're seen. So long and short answer. Yeah.
What do you think is your greatest achievement as an artist?
Not quitting.
What's that?
Not quitting. It's really difficult to tell yourself that you're on the wrong path. It's so easy to tell yourself that you're on the wrong path. It's really easy to listen to the doubt. And man, oh man, through my whole undergrad, I never learned about a Black female abstract painter, and I really struggled. And so it was really difficult for me to see myself in this world. And I was like, maybe they are just not going to tell me that I'm, going the wrong direction. So I'm really proud that I overcame not quitting. Yeah.
You said you had a Fuchsia Collection and Black and Blue Collection. Is this from your Fuchsia Collection, or is this a different collection?
I don't know yet. I make some new works, and Fuchsia is a play on the actual word. So I've spelt it F-U shine. And it's a reclamation for women of color to really shine. So I don't really know about how this fits into that just yet, but yeah.
Are you steering away from the color blue because of the semblance of indigo? Or is it just
I think I lean into it. Like, so I have a whole black and blue series. I'm interested in it. I don't think but what's interesting is like how blue has become a really powerful symbol politically in the past couple of years with Blue Lives Matter. So it's interesting that I started that series and then it's like playing this blue. It's not what I planned.
You did it and then it
Yeah.
turned different because the political.
Yeah, and so it's not that it didn't have political
Yeah,
stuff before, but it certainly has it now. And I'm interested in indigo, and it's certainly an industry that is like propels the slave trade. But I think if I bring indigo dyeing to my hand, because I feel like I would get really intently into it and start trying to dye stuff, I think my husband would be really mad. Like he's right there, so he knows how I'm like, just do this thing. It's fine, and then it takes over the house. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to
You're trying to steer away from that.
steer away from it gently, lightly with the new things. Yeah.
Do you have a medium to work with that you consider your favorite?
Painting all day, every day. It is the coolest thing ever, and I will buy every ounce of it. It is ridiculous. Yeah, I love paint. It's pretty cool.
I'm a very sentimental person when it comes to like clothing.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any like feelings around kind of making your grandmother's gloves into your own piece of artwork?
I think the piece now, I don't know. I mean, I think this is a long version of this, but I struggled so much for my grandma to get what I was doing as an artist. Like, it just didn't make sense to her for a really long time. So in a way, it feels really nice that she was like, I don't know what you're doing, but like here. So I think that is what I hold dear, is that the more that the work made sense, the more that we had a closer connection to the content of the work. So when I first started painting, I was painting all these patterns in quilts, and I was like, Nan, I like made these paintings, and you know about quilts and blah blah blah. And she just got up from the table and walked away, and I was like, okay, great talk, okay, I'll just tell you later. And she comes back with a quilt that she hadn't finished, but she had sewn by hand, right? And years later, the more that she's realized how serious I am about it, she gives me the quilt. So it's at my home. So I think like over the years, we just have had a connection, and I feel like it's okay to have some of those things in the work. Yeah. So I do have a sentimental like relationship to it. I feel like she's there with me in a way.
I'm just gonna kind of speak off the top of my head here, but I was seeing a lot of quiltiness in the paintings. I love abstract work and I love fabrics, and I'm seeing all this, the history that you're bringing into it, so that there's this time, this depth of time, and so there's this profundity, even though it's beautiful. It's not just like a light beautiful, it's like a really deep beautiful. So it says so much on so many levels that I'm kind of gushing because I love what I'm seeing here, and your sensibility and how you're presenting it to us with such humility when it's really powerful stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is so validating, you know? Like, when I say that sometimes things don't make sense, it's like that moment. You're like, oh, you're just rambling and you're saying a whole bunch of stuff, but like, did you make sense? Did you like take a breath? Did you say the things that you wanted to say? So it's really helpful to hear that. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm gonna kind of piggyback off of hers. One of my favorite ones was when you put the slide up with your two family members and your
The
in
drawing.
your abstract, and it might be just me just interpreting it, but I liked how it kind of felt like you knew some of your history, but not all of it, and it's kind of this big jumbled mess. And I couldn't help, like, when you look at it and you look at the pictures, you're like, oh, that's cool. But then you hear about they were sold for a wedding gift, and I couldn't help but like laugh at the irony. It's like, oh,
Right.
happy marriage, here's
Right.
2 people.
Yep. So the crazy part is they bought one, and then they went back and bought 3 siblings and the mom. And they then lived on this. And you are right, like I definitely had knew about my family history for a decent amount of time. We visited South Carolina often, and whenever we were there, more specifically for like family events or funerals, we went to one church. And I was like, why are we going to this? It's like hot, there's no AC, I don't want to be here, like why are we here? And so when I started researching the history, that is what they were allowed to build, that one church and a school. So my family currently still lives on that property. And they were able to purchase it, which I think is really, has its own beautiful history there. But ironically, the drawing that's next to it was from Temple was doing a renovation of their library. And they had like tore down these buildings, and I was like, I don't know how to draw. Like I just need to be inspired to draw something. And so I started drawing the like rebar after something gets torn apart, which like makes the most sense now. But I was like, what is happening? You're doing some research, you're doing some weird drawings, like rebar and construction and blah, blah. It's like now I can like pull it all together and it makes sense to me. But yeah, I knew the history, but like didn't know the history. Yeah. Yeah.
To me, when I noticed this painting from the latest one with the denim jean package, seems like when you come to know it, it seems like the orange was pulled back over time as it becomes more clear. I'm not sure if that's one of the decisions, but that's what my brain picked up, is the use of orange when you place it in the picture. It's a backdrop to all this confusion, and then it becomes less of a backdrop as things become more clear.
I think you just solved one of my hardest mysteries.
Sorry?
No, it's like the best thing ever, actually. So as a painter, I struggle with the color orange. It's absolutely beautiful color, but also really gross. If you've ever painted with orange, it turns funky with anything else, right? Like either you get peach or you're getting like mud, right? Like if you mix it with anything else, you're getting some wonky thing. So I've always struggled with it. I've always wanted to use it. But I think the way that you just described how orange exists in those 2 paintings is awesome. And I've never thought about it that way. So thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a tough question, but I have always struggled being very open and honest in my work. How are you so open and honest with your work about your own personal history and the trauma that not only you have gone through, but so has your family?
That's a tough question. But I'm gonna try. I think part of it, as much as I want to believe that people know, they don't know. And I don't necessarily believe that it's my job to tell them. But I do think it's my job to share it if I have it. And I function in that space. But earlier we were talking in class about why I started painting. So I'll share it with everybody else. I started painting because my mom would read my diaries. And I was like, well, she can't read a painting, so I'm gonna make paintings. And I did. I mean, I like super angsty teen painting like crazy stuff. And I love that abstraction allows me to do that, because the work separate from these 2 pictures can just be a really interesting drawing. And I can stand by it and say, it's a drawing, it's a drawing of a deconstructed building and walk away. But I can also say, well, it was during this time, and I can add all of these other layers. And that, for me, feels like a really safe, like a safety cloak. Like I want to put it on when I want to, and I get to make that decision. And the power lies in me making that decision rather than someone else telling my family's history or demanding that I tell them. And I think there's just power in that. I think as much as you're being vulnerable, you also have the power to say, I don't have to tell you. Like, I don't need you to know that, and I don't need that. And I also think, not to get in the psychology world, but when you start over-explaining, you're like doing that because of a like trauma response, right? So there's all this stuff. So I think there's like, you build your boundaries. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to share it with you. Thank you for that analysis. I'm going to walk away. And I've certainly done that in spaces. I have a piece that talks about very specifically the Brooks slave ship. And I was at an opening, and this gentleman was like, well, it's not like they were like chained up all the time. And I was like, good night. Like, that's enough. And so my response was like, sir, it wasn't a cruise ship. Like, what are you talking about? And then I was like, yeah, I'm not doing this. Because I could stand there, but I think it's so, like, to recognize that it would re-traumatize me so much to have to explain to him how he's wrong, than to just saying, like, I don't think even my words will help you right now. Like, it just... So just having boundaries about it and knowing when it's too much. I think for those of you who are makers in the room and you're making from a personal place, like, don't make and re-trigger yourself in trying to make it make sense. Like, I think it's okay to like make some other weird stuff and then go back to it. So I've like learned that balance over the years, but that is key. Like, boundaries in all levels of it.
Well, I'm going to try and form this into a question, but I want to say that I really appreciated how you seem comfortable, as much as it became sort of part of your working MO, your comfortability with sort of not knowing if it made sense, like even to yourself, and reconciling your sort of formal painter, I'm an abstract painter, with the feelings of needing to and wanting to address personal history and history of race in this country with that formal abstraction. But then you were also talked about like not knowing, like whether it made sense to your grandma, like to think about how this work makes sense on multiple levels. And then add in the self-doubt of the artist, and how you explain your struggle with that. I just want to say I'm really glad that you didn't give up, you know, and to have this work here. Anyway, I think that like maybe that struggle between knowing whether it makes sense or not is an okay place to be. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Is that? I
think so. I'll share a small story. I really hope it's short, but a couple years, so I had like gotten out of grad school. I had all of this like heavy research, like just an immense amount of it, like, and I come back to Boston and started teaching. I was like, I really don't know what I'm doing. Like, in my practice, I want to paint, but I want to like sew something. I don't want to sew my paintings. And a couple of years ago, I got and I was still making murals, so it just was like, I feel like I'm 3 different people in one. And I got a phone call that was like, hey, are you interested in doing a mural? And I was like, yeah, anywhere. And they were like, okay, let's find a place. And they found a location, and it's a film studio in East Boston. And I was like, whatever, like, I'll paint. Just give me a lift or some ladders, and I'm gonna paint it. And I go to Google search it, and I was like, I know this map. Like, I know this map. I've seen this map. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, I gotta dig through all of my research. Like, it's somewhere. I know it. And it's a map of East Boston. It's an old map of Samuel Maverick, one of our founding fathers, land. And I had come across a story about Samuel Maverick. I'm not going to share it because it is a little triggering. So, come across this story, and I'm like, holy shit. I like called my husband. I was like, oh my god, the place that they want me to paint, and the map, and it's lining up, and it is exactly. So it's about a story about a woman who was enslaved by Samuel Maverick, and she tells this story, and Wendy Films is exactly in that land. And it was right at the beginning of Fuchsia, so I was like, now you're getting into color, girl. Like, you really don't know what you're doing. And it all just just clicked. Like, now I know what fuchsia, I knew what FU Shine was. I knew that the history part, I knew the reclaiming of space and public art. It all just came together. And then I was like, okay, that took years for me to get there. So now anything else that comes from that just might take years, but we just have to trust the process. And so after that, I've certainly calmed down a lot of my anxieties around what I was doing, what it's going to lead to, what's next, and just let it go. Because that for sure was a life lesson of you've been sitting on that map for 4 years, right? And it just finally clicked. So, yeah.
We're going to have one more question.
Okay, I don't mean to reach your view, but
No.
when you were talking about the map and the film studio, so the film studio said, oh, here's where we are, and then you put two and two together?
So the film studio was
So the film studio is in
it is on what was Samuel Maverick's land.
That's why.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it was really powerful. So if you look at old maps of Boston, you'll see and that's right next to the airport.
Okay.
So you'll see all of this land filled in. Samuel Maverick owned the original land that hadn't been filled in yet. And so Wendy Films is now on this harbor. Yeah.
I want us to thank Destiny for such a great presentation.
Thank you, Sam.